Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you. This event, we combined a couple of events. Every year we have an annual open house, and today we have two events that was combined, which is the annual open house of our masjid, and also we have this event of love your neighbor from an Islamic perspective and from a Christian perspective. Now, Brother Rick Love, we've been speaking for the past few months about having such an event, so we decided to take advantage of it and combine the two events together. This, inshallah, God's willing, will be an event that will be repeated. So this is the first series of different events. The second series, the second piece or part of this series, inshallah, will be in the Vineyard Church, and that's going to be sometime in March. And God willing, we'll also announce that date. Today we have two distinguished guests. We have Imam Mahmoud Sulaiman, who's the Imam of this mosque, and we have Pastor Jack, who's the pastor of the Vineyard Church. So now Rick Love will give an introduction of Pastor Jack.
Yes, you can use that. Assalamu alaikum. It's an honor for us to be here tonight. I believe this is my third time at the mosque. I have a few friends here. At least Osama loves me. He called me brother the other day, and as we were breaking bread together. I'm also thrilled that our church was willing to come. It's raining a lot where we're at. How many are from the Vineyard visiting? Would you just raise your hand? Thank you. We're so grateful that we can be together. And Pastor Jack Moraine will be teaching. Pastor Jack founded the Vineyard over 20 years ago, and he's the senior pastor. Shall we begin?
That's it. Imam Mahmoud, for the congregation, is well known. For our guests, Imam Mahmoud Sulaiman was born in Egypt, and he got a bachelor's in religion studies from Al-Azhar University in Egypt, and that's one of the well-known Islamic institutions in the world. And he got a master's degree in Hadith, which is prophetic tradition, also from Al-Azhar University. He's been the Imam of this mosque since 2001, and before that, he was the Imam at the mosque in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The form of this night, Imam Mahmoud will speak for half an hour about the Islamic view of neighborly love, and then Pastor Jack will speak for another half an hour, and then after that there will be a session, question and answer session. The volunteers, who we thank a lot for doing this event, will be distributing papers so people can write questions on them, and then you can hand the questions to the volunteers that bring them here, and then we'll select some of those questions. Also, the form, also you can decide if the question is for Pastor Jack or for Imam Mahmoud, and after that we will answer the questions. After that, there will be a short presentation from Cairo, Arizona, and then we'll have the nightly prayer for our non-Muslim guests. They can watch while we're performing the prayer, and then after that we have dinner. Everybody is invited to join with us in breaking bread and having food together. And it's going to be an open session. People can mingle and ask questions during the dinner as well.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأصلي وأسلم على نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. بعد، اسمحوا لي أولا أن أقول أنه لمن دواعي سروري وسعادتي أن أكون في هذه الليلة بعد أجازة طويلة قضيتها، أول ما ألتقي مع إخواني وجيراني وأصدقائي وأحبابي، فهذا سرور عظيم وسعادة جمة. ولم لا؟ ونبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم جعل الجار الصالح المحب لجاره من جملة السعادات الدنيوية، السعادات التي تسعد المرء في حياته أن يكون له جار صالح. وفي ذلك يقول محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم: من سعادة المرء في الحديث، من سعادة المرء المسكن الواسع والجار الصالح والمركب الهنيء أو السريع. هذه السعادات الدنيوية مع الزوجة الصالحة هي أعظم السعادات التي يحظى بها المرء، أن يكون له بيت فسيح، وأن يكون له جار محب ألوف، وأن يكون له سيارة مريحة، وأن يكون عنده زوجة محبة ودودة. فأنتم اليوم من جملة سعاداتي التي أسعدنا بها محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم.
The Imam would like to greet everybody that came tonight, and he would like to start by saying that what brings pleasure to him today, first coming back from a short vacation that he took, what makes him happy today is meeting with his brothers and his friends and his neighbors. And this is a pleasure, a true pleasure, because our Prophet Muhammad, made a neighbor who treats his neighbor well one of the pleasures of this life. And the Prophet said that the pleasures of a person in this life is a house that is spacious, and a righteous, loving neighbor, and a good, fast ride, which could be a car, or could be, in previous times, could be a horse, and a loving spouse. So these are the beauties of this life. These are the pleasures of this life. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, made the loving neighbor one of the pleasures that a person would attain in this life.
كمان أنا سعيد لأن أبو حمزة لما عرف بي خفت إنه يقول سني، فاتحصرت بشكل اتغير، فالحمد لله ما قالش سني. فهذه أيضا من جملة السعادات، إن الواحد ما حدش يبقى عارف سنه إيه.
And also the pleasures that when I introduced the Imam, I did not reveal his age. So one of the pleasures is for people not to know your age and not to know that you're getting old.
ما دمنا اليوم في هذا اللقاء المحب الودود، واللقاءات المحبة دائما يعني تفتح النفس مشهية للكلام، لكن وقت قصير. عاوز أقول ما دمنا ذكرنا إنه من السعادة إن يكون عندك جار محب أنت تحبه ويحبك كما قال محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. فلسعادة الإنسان الإسلام حرص على نشر المحبة والألفة بين الجيران، وجعل هذا الحب سنة من سننه. بل جاء في الحديث عن النبي محمد أن حرمة الجار كحرمة الأم، وفي بعض الحديث أنه أوجب حق الجار إلى 40 دارا. 40 دارا هكذا وهكذا وهكذا هم جيرانك الذين تسأل عنهم في الإسلام على لسان محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. تواسيه وتحبه، بل لا تبيت شبعان وهو جائع. وبذلك كثرت الوصايا عن محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم، حتى قال فيما وصاه به جبريل: ما زال جبريل يوصيني بالجار حتى ظننت أنه سيورثه، سيجعله وريثا لي حتى ظننت أنه سيورثه. وإنما ظن ذلك لأن الحقوق كما نعلم في الميراث تتأكد بالأسباب، يرثك أولادك وذوي رحمك. فلما كانت أسباب الجوار قوية، ظن النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم من كثرة إلحاح جبريل وتوصيته بالجار، ظن لهذا السبب القوي أن جبريل سيجعل له حظا في الميراث كما للأولاد والزوجة تماما بتمام. هكذا أخبر محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم فيما روي في الصحيح.
Since we are talking about the neighbor in this friendly meeting, and the friendly meetings usually have the effect, a good effect on the human nature, even for a short period of time. We said that the loving neighbor is one of the pleasures of a person in this life. Islam, as a faith, was keen on spreading this love between neighbors. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, made the sanctity of a neighbor equal to the sanctity of, even closer sanctity of a person's mother. That the same way that you respect your mother, you respect your neighbor. And made the rights of the neighbor on each other go to the extent of 40 neighbors in every direction. So if you live in a neighborhood, then you count 40 neighbors in every direction, and these are the neighbors that have rights upon you. So you can imagine that if you're living in a city, then all the city are neighbors, and everybody has rights on everybody else. So the parts of the rights of neighbors that you have to console them and help them, and our faith made it part of the faith not to sleep full while your neighbor is sleeping hungry. And there are many recommendations of how to deal with a neighbor and how to treat your neighbor, that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that when the angel Gabriel came and started giving him all of the recommendations and all the rights of neighbors upon neighbors, he said that the angel Gabriel kept on giving me those recommendations and those rights until I thought that the neighbor will have the right of inheritance. And the right of inheritance comes from people with very strong relationship between themselves. So your children inherit you, or your parents, your kinship inherit a person. So because of that strong relationship that our faith stressed on between neighbors, the Prophet thought that the neighbor will have the right of inheritance on his neighbor. So this is what our faith teaches us about a neighbor and how to treat your neighbor.
لكن هذه الوصايا كثيرا ما تتمرد عليها نفوس الناس، فمجرد أن يكون الأمر وصية يمكننا أن أتنصل تلك الوصية، لكن الإسلام لم يشأ أن يكون الأمر مجرد وصية، بل جعل حب الجار والوصية بالجار عماد من عمد الإيمان، جزء من كمال إيمان المسلم. لا يكون مسلما، لا يكون مؤمنا إلا إذا كان محبا لجيرانه، لا يكون مؤمنا عابدا لله إلا إذا كان ألوفا مع جيرانه. جعل الإسلام هذه قاعدة من كمال الإيمان، فقرن الإحسان بالجار بعبادة الله عز وجل، وقرن الإحسان بالجار إلى الإحسان للوالدين، فقال تعالى في نسق 10 أوامر: واعبدوا الله ولا تشركوا به شيئا وبالوالدين إحسانا وبذي القربى واليتامى والمساكين والجار ذي القربى والجار الجنب، يعني الملاصق لك، والصاحب بالجنب، الرفيق في السفر، وابن السبيل وما ملكت أيمانكم إن الله لا يحب من كان مختالا فخورا. إن الذي لا يؤدي هذه الواجبات أحد المتكبرين على أوامر الله عز وجل وعلى عبادة الله عز وجل. هذا الإحسان أصبح الآن جزء من إيمان المسلم لا يتجزأ ولا يكمل إيمانه إلا بهذا الإحسان إلى الجار.
And some people might think that these are just recommendations for people that they have a choice of following or not following. And sometimes people, because of the human nature, if there is a recommendation and it's optional, sometimes they don't burden themselves and they decide not to follow the recommendations. But the faith made this a part of belief. So a Muslim, as part of his belief, he should be or she should be faithful and loving to their neighbor. And Allah revealed in the Quran, He said, and in verses He said, and worship Allah and do not associate partners with Him, and treat your parents well, and treat your kinship well, and treat the orphans and the poor well, and treat your close neighbors well, and also treat your further neighbor well, and treat your friends well, and also people who are passing by, you treat them well. And Allah does not love anybody who is arrogant. So this verse that was revealed and we mentioned makes loving your neighbor part of your faith, and this part, your faith will not be complete without following this teaching of God.
وهذا الإحسان الذي ذكره الله تعالى والوالدين إحسانا وبذي القربى، المقصود منه حسن العشرة مع الجيران، حب الجيران، أن تحب لهم ما تحب لنفسك، وأن تكره لهم ما تكره لنفسك. وهذا كما قلنا جزء إيماني، ليس وصية أو مجرد وصية إما أن تعمل بها أو لا تعمل، بل هي جزء مرتبط بإيمان المسلم. وفي هذا المضمار النبي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول في الحديث الذي خرجه مسلم، وصحيح مسلم هذا من الكتب المعتبرة في الإسلام التي روت الحديث عن النبي محمد. في صحيح مسلم يقول النبي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم: والذي نفسي بيده، يعني والله الذي يملك روحي وقبض نفسي، والذي نفسي بيده لا يؤمن عبد حتى يحب لجاره ما يحب لنفسه. في هذا الحديث النبي محمد نفى كمال الإيمان عمن لا يحب لجاره ما يحب لنفسه. ومعنى الجار حتى لا يظن أحد أننا نتكلم عن المسلم. الجار هنا كما جاء في صحيح مسلم رواية الجار عامة للمسلم وغير المسلم وأهل الكتاب وغيرهم، حتى ولو كان الجار فاسقا أو عدوا أو قريبا أو صديقا، كلهم في المعاملة بالنسبة للإيمان لإيمان المسلم كلهم في ذلك سواء. كل لا يتجزأ في عقيدة المسلم وفي دينه وفي إيمانه الذي سيسأل عنه أمام الله سبحانه وتعالى.
And the good neighborly relations that our faith tells us about or asks us to practice is to love for your neighbor what you love for yourself, and to hate for your neighbor what you hate for yourself. And this is, as we said, is a part of the faith that cannot be taken away. Otherwise, the faith will not be complete, and as we mentioned, is not optional. It's obligatory on every believer. And in this context, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, the Prophet swears by Allah, by God, that a person will not believe until he loves for his neighbor what he loves for himself. So you desire for your neighbor what you desire for yourself. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, makes part of this faith or the faith of a person conditional on loving for your neighbor what you love for yourself. And to clarify this so people will not misunderstand, that the Muslim scholars, they explained in this hadith or this narrations of the Prophet by saying that the neighbor in this narration of the Prophet or in this hadith of the Prophet encompasses or includes Muslim neighbors or non-Muslim neighbors, Christians, Jews. Even includes neighbors that are wretched people, that basically they are people that are treating you bad. You still have to treat them well. And even a neighbor who's your enemy or a friend, it doesn't matter. As long as you have a neighbor, then that command of the Prophet encompasses all types of neighbors with this special treatment or special relation with your neighbor. So as we said before, it's a part of your faith or a part of the Muslim faith that the faith of Muslim is not complete without it.
ولأن حب الجار جزء من الإيمان، جعل علماء الإسلام هذا الحب حق وليس فضل. يعني هذا حق واجب عليك لجارك وليس فضل تتفضل به عليه، إنما هو حق واجب شرعا كسائر الحقوق الشرعية في الإسلام، كالصلاة كالصيام كالحج. هذا حق شرعي على المسلم لجيرانه. من هذه الحقوق كف الأذى، وهذا الحق واجب، فلا يجوز لأحد بحال من الأحوال إيذاء أحد من جيرانه. فعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه فيما رواه البخاري أيضا ومن الكتب المعتمدة في الإسلام، كتب المعتبرة، قال النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم: من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فلا يؤذي جاره. من كان يؤمن بالله واليوم الآخر فلا يؤذي جاره. لا يؤذيه لا بحسد ولا بتمني زوال نعمة ولا بسخرية ولا احتقار ولا إشاعة أخباره وأسراره بين الناس أو الكذب عليه وتنفير الناس منه أو تتبع عثراته وأخطائه أو الفرح بزلاته. هذا كله إيذاء أو مضايقة له في المسكن أو في موقف السيارة مثلا، لو أنه يقف بسيارته في مكان معين، هذه مضايقة، هذا كله إيذاء. حتى قال علماء الإسلام لو أنك رميت كلب جارك بحجر فقد آذيته. قالوا هكذا فهمنا عن رسول الله، لو أنك رميت كلب جارك بحجر فقد آذيته. فهذا الإيذاء ممنوع، وهو حق واجب على المسلم لجاره في الإسلام.
The Muslim scholars, they made loving your neighbor, as we said, an obligatory practice, not optional. And Muslim scholars, they said that this is obligatory, similar to worship, the prayer that Muslims perform, or fasting, or performing pilgrimage. Now, the scholars, they said that this is obligatory, and it's not a favor. That if you're treating your neighbor well, you're maintaining the rights of your neighbor on you, that's not a favor that you will be giving to your neighbor. Rather, it's obligatory on you to do that. And from the rights on neighbors upon each other is not to harm your neighbor in any shape or form. And the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said, whomever believes in God and the day of judgment, then he should not harm his neighbor. So he doesn't harm his neighbor by mocking his neighbor, or envying his neighbor for possessions that his neighbor has, or lying to his neighbor, or lying about his neighbor, or making other people stay away from the neighbor, or doing anything that will make the life of your neighbor miserable by anything, even parking your car in a place that your neighbor doesn't like, for example. That's one thing. Even the scholars, they said that even if you threw a stone on your neighbor's dog, then this is a form of harming your neighbor that you shouldn't do.
هذه الأذية أيضا منها التطلع إلى عورات الجار ومحارمه، وتلك أذية كبرى. والإسلام يرى أن إيذاء الجار بأي نوع من هذه الأنواع، وأن كثير من الجرائم التي ترتكب قد يأخذ المرء عليها إثما واحدا، لكنها إذا كانت مع الجار أو في بيت الجار ضعفت إلى 10 وليس مرة واحدة. فالنبي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم سأل أصحابه يوما: ما تقولون في السرقة؟ قالوا: كبيرة، هذا شيء حرمه الله سبحانه وتعالى وهو عظيم عند الله. فقال: والله لأن يسرق المرء من بيت من 10 أبيات خير له من أن يسرق من بيت جاره. فالسرقة من بيت الجار تضعف على السرقة من غير بيت الجار ب10 أضعاف عقوبة عند الله وجرما عند الله. ثم قال: ما تقولون في الزنا؟ قالوا: حرمه الله ورسوله، هذا حرام معلوم، فهو حرام إلى يوم القيامة. هكذا أجاب الناس بلهفة، وهكذا عندما يسأل الشرفاء أصحاب العفة يجيبون بهذه اللهفة. قالوا: حرمه الله ورسوله، فهو حرام إلى يوم القيامة. فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم: لأن يزني الرجل ب10 نسوة أيسر عليه من أن يزني بامرأة جاره. فهذا حرام حرمه الله وهو كبيرة، لكن هذه الكبيرة تضعف 10 مرات إذا وقعت مع الجار وفي بيت الجار. وهذه حرمات قد تهاون الناس فيها واستسهلوا بها، لكنها عظيمة عند الله في الإسلام وفي المسيحية وفي اليهودية وفي كل دين شرعه الله عز وجل. حرمة الجار عالية، حرمة الجار عظيمة، حرمة الجار كبيرة عند الله. إذا خلقتها ضعفت عليك العقوبة 10 أضعاف مثل تلك الحرمة في غير بيت الجار.
Part of harming your neighbor is spying on him and looking at things that you shouldn't be looking. That if your neighbor or his wife are not decent, then you shouldn't be looking at them or spying on them. And Islam sees that there are Islam's teaching shows or teaches the sins, so everybody knows the clear and the right from the wrong. But in Islam, the sin against the neighbor is multiplied by 10 folds. And the Prophet, peace be upon him, asked his companions. He asked them, "What do you say or what do you think about stealing?" And they said, "This is a major sin." That's what they responded. So the Prophet responded that if a person steals from 10 homes, is better than stealing from his neighbor's home. And then he asked them again. He said, "What do you say or what do you think about adultery?" He said, then the companions responded that it is forbidden by Allah, by God and His prophets. And they said that it is forbidden until the day of judgment. So the Prophet answered or responded, if a man commits adultery with 10 women, is better than committing adultery with his neighbor's wife. So these are sanctities that some people with time might have forgotten, and they think it's easy or simple not to fulfill or practice the rights of your neighbors upon you. But these are sanctities that were given to the neighbor by all faiths, by the Muslim faith, by the Christian faith, by the Jewish faith, and the sanctity of the neighbor is protected by God in all of those faiths.
طبعا هذا الكلام ليس معناه تحسين تلك الجرائم في أماكن بعيدة عن الجار، لأن الحرام حرام في كل مكان، لكن معناه تعظيم هذه الجرائم أكثر وأكثر إذا كانت في بيت الجار، فهي عظيمة في كل مكان، لكنها تصير أعظم وأعظم إذا كانت إيذاء للجار وفي بيت الجار أو مع الجار. هذا حق ينبغي أن نعتني به. والمدنية الحديثة ألهت الناس بكثير من الزيف فأضاعت تلك الحقوق، بل وزينت للناس في كثير من الأفلام والتمثيليات أن هذه أمور سهلة ويسيرة، لكنها في الحقيقة خطيرة. ونحن عندما نتحدث معا اليوم في رحاب الجار وفي حب الجار ينبغي أن نعتني بأنفسنا كمتدينين، لا كمشاهدين للأفلام ولا مقلدين للممثلين والممثلات. يعني الممثلين والممثلات ساعات احنا بنتخيل انهم بيمثلوا في حجر مغلقة، وانه لا، هو فيه كاميرا وفيه مصور وفيه بتاع المونتاج وفيه المخرج حاضرين معاهم. الخيالات بتقع في اذهاننا ان هم بقوا في اماكن خالية، وانه فيه سرير، وانه فيه خلوة، الكلام ده غير صحيح. فينبغي ان احنا ما نسرحش بخيالاتنا مع هذه الاشياء، انما نتعامل مع انفسنا ومع جيراننا كمتدينين، ندين لله تعالى بهذه الأخلاق: حب الجار والحفاظ عليه وعدم إذايته، بل والإهداء إليه. النبي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم من وصاياه الجميلة قال لأبي ذر: يا أبا ذر، إذا طبخت مرقة فأكثر ماءها. لما تطبخ لحمة كتر المية، كتر الشوربة. ليه؟ قال: أكثر ماءها وتعاهد جيرانك، عشان تهدي لجيرانك وتعطيهم من ذلك. وكان أبو ذر رضي الله عنه من أكثر المنتصحين بهذه النصيحة، كان إذا طبخ لحما أكثر ماءه وأهدى إلى جيرانه، ويقول: إن خليلي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم أوصاني إذا طبخت مرقة فأكثر ماءها، ثم انظر أهل بيت من جيرانك فأصبهم منها بمعروف من هذه المرقة، وأولى الجيران بذلك أقربهم إليك بابا. ففي صحيح البخاري عائشة سألت النبي محمد فقالت: إن لي جارين فإلى أيهما أهدي؟ إلى من أعطي هديتي؟ فقال: إلى أقربهما منك بابا. وهذا لأن القريب ملاصق كالوالد والولد، وهو يرى ما يدخل وما يخرج، ومطلع أكثر من غيره من الناس. أشياء كثيرة إخواني وأخواتي أحبائي وجيراني، أشياء كثيرة في الإسلام عن الجار كتب فيها كتب، لكن المطلوب أن نعير آذاننا لهذا الكلام، المطلوب أن يدخل هذا الكلام القلوب، المطلوب أن يتحول هذا الكلام إلى فعل، إلى حركة في المجتمع، حتى نخلق من هذا المجتمع الذي نعيش فيه مجتمع محب. كل الناس يحب بعضهم بعضا. لو أن كل 40 دارا من جيران يمين وشمال وفي المقابل في الشارع المقابل أحب بعضهم بعضا، لتحول المجتمع كله إلى أحباب وكله إلى أصدقاء. فأنت لك أصدقاء في مكان آخر لهم جيران، وهو صديق جيرانه وأنت صديق جيرانك، وهكذا يتحول الناس جميعا إلى أصدقاء. لو أننا عملنا بوصايا الأنبياء وعملنا بوصايا الدين وتناصحنا مع بعضنا البعض وجلسنا مع جيراننا كل فترة نتحدث عن هذا الجو المحب، حب الجار. لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يحب لجاره ما يحب لنفسه. أسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يجعلنا من هذه القلوب المحبة التي تحب لجيرانها الخير وتكره لها الشر، وتحب لها ما تحب لنفسها، ويحب لإخواني ما يحب لنفسه. اللهم آمين يا رب العالمين، وجزاكم الله خيرا وإياكم.
So committing sins that is not acceptable any place, and we talked about committing sins what the Prophet's teaching was. Committing sins is not acceptable anywhere, but the point of this advice of the Prophet was to make the sin greater if it was committed against your neighbor, because it's part of harming your neighbor. So this is the right of the neighbor that we have to understand and to realize. And sometimes with the modern life that we have, we see a lot of movies and TV that really makes light of that, makes light of the relationship between neighbors, and sometimes they even goes into committing sins with your neighbor. So we have to go back to the teachings, and these are the relationship between neighbors. Taken lightly, it's a dangerous aspect of the society. That if people practice that, then the society will be fractured. So we should heed to this advice. So and we should take examples of the teachings of the prophets and what they taught us, and not to take example or make our examples movie stars or movies or what we see in movies. So part of also maintaining good relation with your neighbor is gifting your neighbor, and even small things. And the Prophet told one of the companions, his name is Abu Dharr, that he told them that if you cook food, if you cook soup or stew, then increase the water in the stew so you can look around you and see your neighbors, and then you can give them some of this food. And this companion Abu Dharr, he used to be one of the people that practiced this very well. That he used to say that he was practicing this because that was the teaching of the Prophet, that also in another recommendation to him, he told him that if you cook meat, then look at your closer neighbors and give them pieces of this meat. Now, the closer the neighbor to you, then the more rights they have upon you. So because they're going to be closer to you, they know more about you, they know more, and you should know more about them. The wife of the Prophet, Aisha, asked the Prophet. She said that she wants to gift one of her neighbors. That she has two neighbors that she wants to gift one of them, and who should she give the gift to? And he said, give the gift to the one closer to your door. That the door of your neighbor, the closer to your door, then that's the one that you should gift. Now, the reason for that, because like we said, these are neighbors that know more about you, know more about your life, so they should be even closer to you. Now, there are many things that were mentioned about neighbors and how to treat the neighbors, and there were books written about that. The point is that this small event about neighbors these words should enter the hearts, and that also should turn the hearts of people into actions. That people should practice that, so we can make this society a more loving society. Now, if you think about, like we said at the beginning, if you're taking care of 40 neighbors from all directions, and the neighbors in 40 directions take care of you, then the society will turn into friends. It will turn into people loving each other, having good relations with each other. And this would be practiced only by going back to the teachings of the religions, of the prophets. All the prophets taught us the same thing. So we remember at the end, or we conclude by mentioning again the hadith of the Prophet, the narration of the Prophet, that he said that you will not believe until you love for your neighbor what you love for yourself. Assalamu alaikum.
It's an honor to be here tonight, and on behalf of myself and the members of our congregation, I want to thank Imam Mahmoud and Usama and all of you here at the Islamic Community Center for putting on this event and hosting us this evening. We just want to thank you for your graciousness and your hospitality. We appreciate this opportunity to fellowship with you, to connect with you, and to learn from you. And I so appreciated Imam Mahmoud's talk, and in our background we would say amen to that. I think the topic for tonight's gathering, loving your neighbor, is especially appropriate as a starting point for conversation and dialogue for people of faith, both Muslims and Christians. And of course, our hope is that this will be the first of many times that we can come together and share together. My task tonight is to share with you briefly from my faith perspective what it means to love one's neighbor. Jesus was asked on one occasion by an expert in the law, that is, an expert in the Torah, what the greatest commandment was. And Jesus replied by saying that the greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and all your strength. And then Jesus went on to add that the second greatest commandment is like the first: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And what I find interesting is that this religion scholar didn't ask Jesus what the two greatest commandments were. He only asked Jesus what the greatest commandment was. But Jesus felt the need to connect the command to love our neighbor to the command to love God with our whole being. And I believe that what Jesus was trying to tell us is that loving God and loving our neighbor are like two sides of a coin. You can't have one without the other. And that the true test of whether we love God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength is whether, in fact, we do love our neighbor as ourselves. Simply put, our love for God is expressed every time we love our neighbor. You know, Jesus told an amazing and rather subversive story about loving our neighbor in Luke 10:25 through 37. It's the story of the Good Samaritan, and the subversive and shocking aspect of the story is, for the most part, I think, lost on us today, because we live in an entirely different cultural context. Jesus tells this story in response to another question. Another expert in the law, different than the one we talked about a moment ago, but another religious scholar of Jesus' day and time, asked Jesus what he must do to inherit eternal life. And Jesus responded by asking him a question. He said, well, what is written in the law? What's written in the book? How do you read it, Jesus said. And what he meant by that is, how do you interpret it? How do you understand it? And the religion scholar ended up having the right answer. He responded by saying, well, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so Jesus commended him and told him that he'd answered correctly. And then Jesus said, do this and you will live. But the expert in the law had a follow-up question. He asked, and who's my neighbor? Because he wanted to place limits on who he had to love. And just like a lawyer, isn't it, to get into the technical aspect of it all, and exactly who is my neighbor? Let's define this now. And so Luke says the reason that he asked Jesus this question was because he wanted to justify himself. In other words, he asked the question, who's my neighbor, because he wanted to justify his own prejudices. And in so doing, place limits on the law of love. And so in response to his question, who's my neighbor, Jesus launches into this story that we know of as the parable of the Good Samaritan. And here's what Jesus said to him. He said, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So to a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. Look after him, he said, and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. And then Jesus asked this religion scholar, this expert in the law, he asked him this question. Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? And the expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus told him, go and do likewise. Now, in order for this story to have the same impact for us that it would have had for the people who first heard it from the lips of Jesus, that religious scholar and anybody else who was standing around who heard it that day, we need to understand that the Pharisees of Jesus' day, and that, by the way, is the religious sect to whom this expert in the law belonged, you need to understand that they did not have a high opinion of priests, they did not have a high opinion of Levites, and they despised Samaritans. And so Jesus, when he told the man this story, was basically setting him up. The man who falls in among robbers and who is badly injured by the side of the road, as this religious scholar is hearing Jesus tell the story, and Jesus says, and the first man who came by was a priest, and he just walked by on the other side. The religious scholar is sitting there, of course, thinking, well, of course, what can you expect from priests? And then the second man down the road's a Levite, and the Pharisees didn't consider them all that spiritual either. And so when he likewise passes by the man, he's thinking to himself again, well, what can you expect of the Levites? And my best guess is that the religion scholar thought that the next person down the road surely has to be a Pharisee, has to be one of his own. And he will surely take care of the man. But in Jesus' story, it's not a Pharisee. It's somebody that the Pharisees disliked even more, and that is the Samaritan who comes down the road. And the point that would help us to understand the meaning of the story, I think, is that we need to understand that no one would have used the word good in Jesus' day, at least among his people, amongst the Jews of Jesus' day. No one would have used the word good to describe a Samaritan. Those two words simply did not belong together. They were an oxymoron. And the expert in the law, couldn't even bring himself to use the words, the Samaritan, when answering Jesus' question about which one of these was a neighbor to the injured man. When Jesus said, so which one was a neighbor to him, you may recall the religion scholar didn't say the Samaritan. He said, well, I suppose it was the one who had mercy on him. And Jesus said, that's right, so go do the same thing. Rather than answering the question, who's my neighbor, this story of Jesus actually destroys, I think, the idea of placing limits on who we're required to love. Who is my neighbor is the wrong question. The right question is, am I a neighbor to anyone who needs my help, including those who are different from me and from the social, cultural, and religious groups of which I'm a part? Do I understand that the command to love my neighbor includes all people, or am I like the expert in the law, trying to justify myself by defining neighbor in more narrow terms that allow me to limit those I need to love with mercy, compassion, and understanding? In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, if you love those who love you, what's the big deal in that? He says, even sinners, even, bad people, people of bad character, even they love those who love them. He says there's nothing extraordinary about loving people who love us. Some of the most challenging words of Jesus, however, occur in that same message when he says, you've heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy, but I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. Jesus not only taught us to love our enemies, he modeled it for us when he prayed for forgiveness on the cross for those who crucified him. And we're never more like him than when our love for neighbor includes all people, including even our enemies and those who we've been culturally conditioned by our society and by people around us to see as our enemies. Let me just pause, if I might, here to make something very clear. You, our Muslim neighbors, are not our enemies. I know that some people, even some Christians, see Muslims in this light, but they're wrong. And they do not represent the true spirit of Jesus. And let me say one more thing. We who are Christians must acknowledge that we have some dark chapters in our history. There have been times when we've not only failed to love our Muslim neighbors, we have treated Muslims as our enemies, and in so doing, we've sinned against you, against God, and we've brought dishonor on the name of the one we claim to follow. And our sins are not confined to the past. The vast majority of Christians in America, myself included, I think, have done a much better job of ignoring our Muslim neighbors rather than accepting them and loving them as Jesus wants us to. And so for all of this, I ask God's forgiveness, and I ask yours as well. It's one thing to embrace a theology of loving our neighbor. It's another thing to put it into practice. And I've had the opportunity over the years to travel to a number of different countries and meet many different kinds of people. And in that process, I've developed a love and a fondness for people and relationships with folks that I count as my friends, as my neighbor, that I never thought I would. And it wasn't even something that I had to work at or work hard at. It was simply a byproduct of going and being with people in relationship, just a byproduct of spending time together and getting to know each other. And so I would say to you this evening, it's much easier to love the neighbor that we know than the neighbor that we don't. And I believe that's the reason we're here tonight and the real value in our coming together tonight. It's hard to overstate the importance the Bible places on loving our neighbor. The Apostle Paul argues that when we love our neighbor, we're fulfilling the law of God. He describes love for neighbor as a debt that we owe to God that's never paid in full. It's the one debt we never pay off. Listen to what he says. He says, let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For he who loves his fellow man has fulfilled the law. The commandments, do not commit adultery, do not murder, do not steal, do not covet, and whatever other commandment there may be are summed up in this one rule: love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to its neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law. From a biblical perspective, love for neighbor is active. It's not passive. We don't love our neighbor by merely thinking good thoughts or having warm, fuzzy feelings about them. We demonstrate love for our neighbor through our actions, by helping those in need, by showing respect, honor, and kindness. And one of my mentors, Jerry Cook, wrote a book a number of years ago entitled Love, Acceptance, and Forgiveness. And in this book, he talks about what it means to make a commitment to love another person. He says when we commit ourselves to love our neighbor, that what we're saying is this: I want you to know that I'm committed to you. You'll never suffer knowingly at my hands. I'll never knowingly say or do anything to hurt you. I'll always, in every circumstance, seek to help you and support you. If you're down and I can lift you up, I'll do that. Anything I have that you need, I'll share with you, and if need be, I'll give it to you. No matter what I find out about you, and no matter what happens in the future, either good or bad, my commitment to you will never change. And there's nothing you can do about it. You don't even need to respond. I love you, and that's what that means. So again, I just want to thank Imam Mahmoud and Usama and all of you here at the Islamic Community Center who worked so hard to put this dinner and this event together. I know you've had an open house today. Thank you for allowing us to come and share in that with you. And thank you for allowing me to share with you tonight concerning loving our neighbor from our faith perspective. I look forward to learning more about your life and your faith, and I'm committed to loving you as my neighbor.
Thank you. Thanks, Pastor Jack. And now it's question and answer session. I think. Do we have any questions that were written? Let me go through this, and then we can get. This is for Pastor Jack. It says, as we knew Christianity respects religious. I don't know. Maybe you can read the handle.
Okay, let's see. As we know, Christianity I think must mean respects religions before them. Okay. I assume maybe before them in time, that existed before them in time?
Maybe, I don't know.
What Christian or religious people think about Islam and religions
maybe.
and Muslims? What Christians or religious what do Christians and religious people think about Islam or
as we know, Christianity respect religion before them. What Christian as religious and people think about Islam on religion as religion and Muslim? Basically, they're asking you.
Okay.
What the Christian think about the Islamic religion, the Muslim religion?
Okay. What do Christians think about Islam and the Muslim? Okay.
It's good that it was not only me.
You probably it's difficult to speak for all Christians, and certainly I cannot do that. And I think that what Christians believe or think about Islam as a religion depends on their level of understanding and too whether or not they've even taken the time to find out or to discover what Muslims believe. This is something that Rick, for example, has been helping me with over the years, and I think that at least for me, and many of the Christians that I know, we understand that Muslims believe in the one true God, and Rick has been teaching me about the 5 pillars, but I might not be able to come up with all 5. I understand the importance of pilgrimage, and at least my understanding, and I think most Christians' understanding, is that Muslims love God, and they love their neighbor, and that they are committed to acts of charity, and that to care for the poor is a significant part of your religion. And of course, we understand Muhammad being the prophet and being the founder of of Islam, and that would be sort of the basic understanding that I think most Christians would have. But I'm not sure that very many Christians know in very much detail, to be quite honest, what Muslims believe.
No, maybe you should ask it instead of reading it. Yeah, Rick has a long question, so I'm not.
First of all, my question is, can we get Imam Mahmoud, can we get his message and put it on a website? I would love to get that in English. That was beautiful. I think we should get both messages. Where's my... Did you take it back from me?
This one? Question?
Yeah. Maybe I misunderstand, so please forgive me. But a lot of people tell me that one of the concepts of Islam is the dhimmi, that if someone... Dhimmi, yeah. And so how does love of neighbor relate to the Islamic concept of dhimmi, where non-Muslims have to pay extra taxes because they're not Muslims? How does this apply today? It seems like love of neighbor should have equality. Maybe I misunderstand, but even if I get it right, many non-Muslims think this. So you need to help me with the right answer.
من أسس الإسلام إنه الجزء السياسي لا يختلط أبدا بالجانب الاجتماعي. الجانب السياسي لا يختلط بالجانب الاجتماعي إطلاقا ولا يؤثر عليه. ما ذكرته أنت من موضوع الجزية هذا يعتبر في الإسلام من تصنيف الجانب السياسي وليس الجانب الاجتماعي. الجانب الاجتماعي يبقى على ما هو عليه، يعني سياسة الدولة والاجتماعيات. الدولة مكونة من مجتمع، علاقات سياسية، علاقات دولية، علاقات اجتماعية في الداخل وعلاقات اجتماعية في الخارج. هذا الجزء الذي نتحدث عنه خاص بالعلاقات الاجتماعية. ولذلك تجد انه احنا مثلا المصريين، هضرب مثال كمصر وكذلك في فلسطين، كنت ترى الرجل العمارة الواحدة يسكن فيها المسلم والمسيحي واليهودي. وأنا اليوم كنت أشاهد قناة الجزيرة عاملة برنامج خاص عن الموالد، الاحتفالات بالموالد، فجابت المسيحيين وهم بيحضروا مع المسلمين مولد أبو حجاج قشيش، وجابت المسلمين وهم في كنيسة ماري جرجس بيتبرعوا للكنيسة وبيتبركوا بالسيدة مريم العذراء في يوم مولدها. الجانب الاجتماعي لا يختلط بالجانب السياسي. ولذلك أضرب لك مثال من القديم ليس من الحديث. النبي محمد نفسه كان له جار يهودي، وكان على علاقة طيبة به جدا، وكان هذا الجار لم تتحسن علاقته بمحمد إلا بعد التجربة. يعني كان متأثر ربما بالناحية الإعلامية. الإعلام اليهودي في هذا الوقت كان ضد محمد، فالرجل الرجل كان متأثر بالإعلام، فكان بيتعامل مع النبي بطريقة إيذاء. فلما مرض عاده النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم، فلما عاده تغيرت الوجهة الإعلامية في نظر هذا الرجل وعرف أن هذا الشخص محب. كذلك بالنسبة للرجل الذي كان جاره أيضا وكان ابنه مريضا، فعاد ابنه المريض بل إن الرجل أسلم ولده لمحمد وقال أطع أبا القاسم. عبد الله بن عمرو بن العاص ذبح شاة وقال لغلماني أهديتم لجارنا اليهودي؟ ثم قال أهديتم لجارنا اليهودي؟ ثم قال أهديتم لجارنا اليهودي؟ فواحد من جلساء قال لي يا أخي ده واشتني حكاية جارك اليهودي جارك اليهودي. قال له أنا سمعت رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول ما زال جبريل يوصيني بالجار حتى ظننت أنه سيورثه. فالعلاقات الاجتماعية لم تتأثر ولن تتأثر بالعلاقات السياسية أو بالمادة السياسية التي تشرعها الدولة في قانون السياسة، سواء كانت سياسة الدولة أو السياسة الدولية. وهذا ما ينبغي أن نتعارف عليه وأن نتعامل من أجله. نتعامل على أساس العلاقات الاجتماعية الغير متأثرة بالعلاقات السياسية، وهذا ما قرره الإسلام في أصوله وقواعده. العلاقات الاجتماعية لا تتأثر بالعلاقات السياسية أو بما تدبره الدولة من سياسة السلطان والملك. سياسة السلطان والملك شيء والعلاقات الاجتماعية شيء آخر. هذا ما أحب إن احنا نتعارف عليه.
No. No. Imam Mahmoud was trying to explain that there are a difference between the political principles and the societal principles, and the relationship between people is part of the relations in the society, and this does not change. It's not affected by being a Muslim or being a non-Muslim. Now, paying the tribute, which was imposed on non-Muslims living in Muslim countries, while Muslims also paid a different types of tribute, that's part of the political Islamic system, and it's not an unfair system, because again, Muslims and non-Muslims paid into the political system.
وهو الإيضاح يعني جزء يساوي جزء الزكاة الذي يدفعه المسلم.
And it is equal to what a Muslim paid in zakah. So non-Muslims paid the tribute, but that's equal. It's like paying taxes, and living in this country, you pay taxes regardless of your faith. Now, the Muslim system called the tax on non-Muslims different than what they called it on Muslims, but it had nothing to do with social order and how people treated each other. So, for example, in different countries like Egypt and Palestine and Lebanon, you had neighbors living next to each other. You had, for example, apartments, and you have in one apartment you have a Christian, another a Muslim, another a Jew, and the Imam was explaining that he was watching a show on Al Jazeera, which is the famous channel, that was showing different Muslim festivals and Christian festivals in Egypt, and how Muslims were joining Christians in their festivals, and how Christians were joining Muslims in their festivals. And the Prophet also had different neighbors, and some of his neighbors were Jews, and he had, for example, one of them, he had good relations with him after an experience. At the beginning, the Jewish neighbor didn't like the Prophet. He used to throw garbage in his way, and then after that, because he was affected by what others were saying about the Prophet, after that his relation with the Prophet was improved. Like the Imam saying, it's like a media. There was a media at that time that basically was saying bad things about the Prophet. So, and another Jewish neighbor, he had a sick son, and the Prophet went and visited him and visited his sick son. So the issue of religion has nothing to do with the dhimmi, and actually the dhimmi concept is for protection of the minority Christians and Jews living in Muslim countries. There's another companion. His name is Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As. One time he slaughtered the sheep, and then he asked his servants, "Did you take pieces of that to our Jewish neighbor?" And they didn't respond. So he went and came back and asked them. So he kept on asking them, and then one of the servants, he said, "Why do you keep on asking about your neighbor?" He said, "Because the Prophet told us that the angel Gabriel recommended us to treat our neighbors well until the Prophet thought that he was going to give him the right of inheritance." So the relationship between people has nothing to do with the political system or the dhimmi system, which again, as we explained, it's the dhimmi system. All what it does, it has Muslims living in majority Muslim countries pay taxes similar to Muslims who pay taxes. There's a question for Pastor Jack. It says, why there are so many versions of the Bible and what caused that? So I don't know if we're going to spend all night going through this. But
I'll try and give a simple answer to that. One reason there's so many translations or versions of the Bible is because of the desire to continue to translate the ancient texts that were written in other languages in a way that is that communicates to people now in a contemporary way and in our cultural context. That's one reason why the Bible continues to be retranslated. Again, all the scholars who translated worked from those same original texts in Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic. And then another factor for some of that, even with some of the contemporary translations and versions, is that there are different translation techniques, basically, or translation principles that some of the scholars working on different versions are using. So some translations are shooting for or aiming at a very literal word-for-word translation of the text into English, even though it may not be really very good English, and it might still be a little bit hard to understand. And then there are other translations that strive for what's called dynamic equivalence. And one very simple example is this. There's a place where literally in the Greek, Jesus said to his followers, he said, "Let this sink deeply into your ears." Now, one of the word-for-word translation would pretty much translate it that way. Let this sink deeply into your ears. What does that exactly mean, though? That was an idiom, though, in that day and time. So the dynamic equivalent translations and versions would translate it like this. Listen very carefully to what I'm about to tell you, because that's what it means. And so you can see even there that one of the reasons there's different translations is because the aim is different sometimes to try and bring it over into English. And I'm just talking about English translations now. I can't speak to all the other translations in other languages as well. But I think that's why there's a continuing need for that, and that's probably why so many exist.
There's another question for Pastor Jack. It says, is there any similarity between Islam and Christianity?
I think there's quite a few points of similarity, and obviously we all understand too that there are points of difference. But just listening to Imam Mahmoud's talk tonight, he quoted from your sacred writings, and I was sitting here and thinking of quotations from our sacred writings that say very similar kinds of things. And the value, for example, that we're even talking about tonight, of that is placed on loving our neighbor, and loving our neighbor whether they love us back or not, and we all understand that's a pretty tall order, but I think that's probably the true test of our our faith many times and our love for God is if we're able to love those who are different from us. It's easy to love those who are like us and who it's easy to build a relationship with. But I think those are good steps in our faith, exercising our faith, demonstrating our faith when we love those who are come from a different background and all of that. And so I think there are many other points of similarity. Islam, Christianity believes is monotheistic, as is the Jewish religion, and we could go on from there, but I know there's many more questions. So,
question for Imam Mahmoud: if you could choose one thing that a Christian could do as peacemaking, what would it be? If you could choose one thing that a Christian could do as peacemaking, what would it be? إذا كنت تختار شيء المسيحيين يقدروا يعملوا للسلام، يعني ماذا يقدر المسيحيين أن يعملوا للسلام؟ هل تختار يعني شيء واحد؟ تقول
أولا يعني عاوز أقول نحن يعني نعتقد من جملة عقائدنا أن المسيحية في شخص عيسى عليه السلام هي السلام، وهكذا ينبغي أن تكون السلام حتى مع الحيوان ليس مع الإنسان. نحن عندما نتحدث عن عيسى نقول من جماليات عيسى عليه السلام أنه مر كلب، فتنحى له عيسى وقال مر بسلام، مر بسلام، فقال له جلساؤه تقول هذا لكلب؟ كلب تقول له مر بسلام؟ فقال نعم إني أكره أن أعود لساني السوء. كلمة السلام كلمة جميلة وطيبة، وهي عماد من أعمدة المسيحية التي أضاعتها ضوضاء ضد من ومع من. هذه ضوضاء ينبغي أن نتخلى عنها. ما أشير به على إخواني من المسيحيين إن هم يرجعوا تاني لتعاليم عيسى عليه السلام، يرجعوا للسلام الذي نشره عيسى، يقرأوا الإنجيل. وأنا قبل كده دايما أقول لنفسي والإخوان المسلمين كل المطلوب منا أن نقيم القرآن. والقرآن لما كلم أهل الكتاب قال أقيموا التوراة والإنجيل وما أنزل إليكم من ربكم. والله لو أن كل واحد مننا أقام كتابه كما ينبغي لاسترحنا وتحاببنا وعم السلام بيننا، لأن المسيحي أصبح مسيحي يدين بأقوال عيسى عليه السلام في السلام، والمسلم أصبح مسلما يدين بقول محمد في السلام، واليهودي أصبح يهوديا يدين بقول موسى في السلام، وهنالك يتحابب الناس جميعا. ما أريده أن نقيم التوراة والإنجيل وأن نقيم القرآن. إذا فعلنا ذلك أقمنا السلام معا إن شاء الله، وأنا آمل ذلك إن شاء الله في المستقبل القريب أنه بيتحقق وينتشر جيل من الناس الحمد لله استيقظوا من هذه الغيبوبة التي طمست علينا من جهات متعددة. إن شاء الله نفيق منها ونعمل معا يدا واحدة للسلام.
We believe that